They tell you that power lives in mansions. They tell you that the men who rule the global underworld do it from leather-bound chairs in mahogany boardrooms, looking out over glittering skylines. Hollywood built a monument to the flashy kingpins, the men who died in a hail of gunfire wearing silk suits and diamond rings. But the archives tell a different story. The archives hold the cold, damp truth. In the Sicilian capital of Palermo, down a winding, narrow corridor of an unfinished apartment complex on the Via Bernini, there is a space no larger than a janitor's closet. It smells of stale tobacco, damp plaster, and human confinement. For 5 years, the most feared criminal mastermind on earth did not see the sun. He did not step on grass. He did not breathe fresh air. His name was Salvatore Riina. To the public, he was the beast. To the men who swore their lives to the Cosa Nostra, he was the boss of bosses. He was a man who had signed the death warrants of judges, prosecutors, and police captains. A billionaire warlord running a multinational empire that moved tons of narcotics across the Atlantic. And yet, his throne was a plastic chair set next to a leaking toilet. His kingdom was bounded by 4 walls of cracked ceramic tile. This was the ultimate trade-off of a life lived under the shadow of Omerta, absolute authority over an invisible empire, exercised from absolute, suffocating imprisonment. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled wasn't making the world believe he didn't exist. It was convincing himself that ruling from a bathroom stall was still victory. Welcome back to the vault. Pull your chair in close, right into the circle of light. The files we keep in these drawers aren't for the faint of heart. They are the raw data of human ambition stripped of its glamour. When we look back at the twilight of the 20th century, we see the total collapse of the old criminal regimes. For decades, the bosses thrived because they were integrated into the fabric of daily life. They were pillars of their communities, owners of legitimate businesses, protectors of the neighborhood. But when the state finally woke up, when the laws changed and the tracking tech advanced, the bosses had two choices: surrender the throne or disappear into the ground. Salvatore Riina chose the ground. He turned his existence into a forensic mystery, a psychological puzzle that took the international law enforcement community nearly 2 decades to solve. He ruled a continent from a bathroom stall, proving that power isn't a physical place. It is a state of terror. Tonight, we open the file on the ultimate fugitive. We pull back the curtain on the psychological decay, the logistical nightmares, and the sheer paranoia that turns a billionaire warlord into a voluntary prisoner of a porcelain cell. This is the truth behind the Hollywood myths. This is the file of the bathroom king. To understand why a man would tolerate living in a bathroom for 5 years, you have to understand where he crawled out of. Salvatore Riina wasn't born into wealth. He was born into the dirt of Corleone in 1930. Corleone wasn't just a village. It was a psychological pressure cooker. It was a place where life was cheap and survival was calculated in calories and spent cartridges. Riina's father was a poor peasant farmer who died when Sal was just 13 years old, killed while trying to dismantle an unexploded American bomb from the war to sell the gunpowder on the black market. The explosion didn't just kill his father, it tore the family's economic future to pieces. Riina was left with nothing but his bare hands and an absolute, unyielding hatred for the society that had left his family to starve. By the time he was 19, he had committed his first murder for the local mafia clan, led by Michele Navarra. He didn't kill for passion. He killed for a place in the hierarchy. He killed for order. The old men in Palermo, the sophisticated bosses who ran the cigarette and heroin smuggling routes out of plush villas, looked down on the Corleonesi. They called them the peasants. They thought men like Riina were just muscle, ignorant farm boys who could be handled with a few crumbs from the table. They were wrong. Riina possessed a primitive, predatory intelligence. He understood that sophisticated men have things they love: reputations, wealth, families, comfort. A peasant from Corleone who loves nothing but power is a machine that cannot be jammed by conventional means. He didn't want a seat at their table. He wanted to use the wood of their table to build his own throne. Every empire has a blueprint for its demise. In the files of the vault, we see that the fall of Salvatore Riina in Italy runs completely parallel to the spectacular destruction of the Lucchese drug ring across the ocean in America. It is the curse of the criminal logistics chain. Think back to the lesson of Sal, the spark vital on the New Jersey Turnpike. A billion-dollar operation, moving weight through the Brooklyn Navy Yard, brought down not by an FBI mastermind, but by a $10 piece of brittle plastic, a broken tail light, a routine traffic stop near exit 13, a single patrolman looking into a trunk and finding a ledger that exposed the entire commission of the American Mafia. Riina watched those events from his hiding place in Sicily. He read the reports of how the American bosses were being lined up in federal courtrooms because they had grown too comfortable. They had relied on clean cars, nice neighborhoods, and the belief that the system would protect them if they didn't make a scene. The lesson Riina took from the American collapse was radical. Any connection to the physical world is a vulnerability. A car can be pulled over. A house can be wiretapped. A phone line can be traced. If a broken taillight can destroy a billion-dollar network in New York, then the only way to survive in Palermo is to strip away everything that makes life worth living. He decided that if the state couldn't find him, they couldn't wiretap him. And the only place the state wouldn't look for a billionaire was in a filthy 5x5 ceramic box. He traded the infrastructure of a modern corporate mafia for the survival tactics of a cave dweller. Let's talk about the daily reality of the bathroom. This wasn't a temporary hideout during a rough week. This was his operational headquarters for 5 long years. How does a man run an organization that employs thousands of soldiers, manages hundreds of millions of dollars in drug profits, and controls political appointments across an entire country while sitting next to a shower curtain? The answer is the Pizzini. Riina banned all electronic communication. No phones, no radios, no walkie-talkies. Every order he gave was written on a tiny piece of onion skin paper, folded into a square no bigger than a postage stamp, and wrapped in clear tape. These notes were called Pizzini. They were passed through a human chain of absolute trust. A courier would travel from Palermo to Corleone, hand the note to a second courier in a grocery store, who would pass it to a third in a church, until it reached its final destination. But the physical limitations of the bathroom created a psychological distortion. When your world is that small, your mind focuses on the absolute execution of details. Riina became obsessed with control. He would spend 8 hours writing a single Pizzini, regulating the price of construction gravel in a small village 40 miles away. He ate out of tin cans. He washed his underwear in the sink. His skin turned a pasty, translucent gray from the lack of sunlight. His joints stiffened from the humidity trapped in the unventilated space. He had all the wealth of a small European nation stored in Swiss bank accounts, but his luxury was a brand new roll of toilet paper. Paranoia in the underworld isn't a disease, it's a form of insurance. In the bathroom, Riina's paranoia became his oxygen. He knew that the only thing keeping him alive was the fact that nobody knew which door he was behind. He didn't even trust his own family. His wife Ninetta and his children lived in a separate part of the house, completely sealed off from the bathroom complex by a heavy, reinforced wardrobe that had been converted into a secret sliding door. They were allowed to see him only for an hour a day, under the cover of darkness. They didn't speak in whispers. They communicated through written signs to defeat any directional microphones the Italian police might have planted in the walls. The archives show that Riina kept a loaded Beretta 9 pistol taped to the underside of the sink basin at all times. He didn't keep it there to fight off the police. He kept it there for his own people. He knew that if a capo ever walked through that door without permission, it meant the price on his head had exceeded the value of his loyalty. Every sound in the plumbing became a threat. Every change in the voltage of the single light bulb above his head was interpreted as a sign that a surveillance van had tapped into the building's power grid. He was a king who had built a fortress so secure that it had become his own execution chamber. While Riina was rotting in his bathroom, the outside world was burning down his house. In 1986, the Italian state did something the mafia believed was impossible. They built the bunker courtroom inside the walls of the Ucciardone prison in Palermo. This was the Maxi trial. 474 mafiosi were put on trial at the same time inside a reinforced concrete structure designed to withstand rocket attacks. The prosecutors, Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, had done what the American prosecutors had done with the Lucchese ledger. They had found the thread and pulled it until the whole fabric unraveled. The evidence didn't come from a broken taillight this time. It came from Tommaso Buscetta, the first high-ranking Sicilian boss to break omertà. Buscetta told the judges everything. He explained the structure of the commission. He explained that the Corleone weren't just a clan. They were a dictatorship that had hijacked the Cosa Nostra. From his plastic chair in the bathroom, Riina watched the television screen. He saw his closest allies, men he had shared blood with, being sentenced to life terms in steel cages. He saw his empire being legalized out of existence. His response was typical of the peasant from Corleone. If the state wanted a war, he would give them a cemetery. May 23, 1992. The Capaci highway outside Palermo. Salvatore Riina decided that if he had to live in a bathroom, the men who put him there wouldn't get to enjoy the fresh air either. He ordered his top hitman, Giovanni, to pack a drainage tunnel beneath the highway with half a ton of TNT. When Judge Giovanni Falcone's car drove over the spot, Brusca pressed the remote control. The blast was so violent it registered on local earthquake monitoring systems. It didn't just kill Falcone, it blew a 100-meter gap in the Italian state's sense of security. 2 months later, Borsellino was blown up by a car bomb in Palermo. Riina had won the military campaign from his porcelain cell. He had killed the 2 men who had dared to read his ledgers. But the archives show that this was his psychological undoing. You cannot bomb a modern European state into submission without triggering a counter-reaction that overrides the rules of politics. The murders of Falcone and Borsellino turned the public against the mafia for the first time in Sicilian history. The protection that the Corleone had enjoyed from corrupt politicians in Rome dissolved overnight. The bathroom was no longer a hiding place. It was a trap that was slowly being circled by the army. January 15, 1993. The morning was cold, the sky a dull, flat white over Palermo. Salvatore Riina finally left the Via Bernini complex. He was sitting in the passenger seat of a modest Citroën, driven by his courier, Salvatore Biondino. He was 70 years old, wearing a cheap suit that smelled of mothballs and bathroom cleaner. He didn't have his bodyguards. He didn't have his weapons. He thought he was just another old man going to a doctor's appointment. At a traffic light near the Rotonda di Via Leonardo da Vinci, a group of unmarked cars surrounded the Citroën. The men who pulled him out weren't tactical teams in armor. They were the Catarandi, the special operations unit of the Carabinieri who had spent 10 years living in surveillance vans, tracking the Pizzini back to the source. When they put the cuffs on him, Riina didn't fight. He didn't shout. He looked at the sky, his eyes watering from the unaccustomed brightness of the Sicilian sun. He looked at the men who had caught him and asked, "Who are you?" They didn't answer him. They didn't need to. They walked him into the light, away from the bathroom, away from the secret corridors, and straight into a maximum security cell where he would spend the remaining 24 years of his life. The beast of Corleone had been brought down not by a rival family, but by the weight of his own isolation. Every story in this vault has a cost. The Hollywood movies want you to believe that the mafia is about the lifestyle, the money, the power, the respect. But the file of Salvatore Riina shows you the receipt. He was the most powerful man in the history of the European underworld. He controlled billions of dollars. He had the power of life and death over kings and judges. And his reward was 5 years of self-inflicted torture in a bathroom stall, followed by a lonely death in a prison hospital bed. The Cosa Nostra built its myth on the idea of freedom, of being outside the law